Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 5 of the class. I hope that you are all doing well. This week's going to be a little bit different in that you have the first of your 3 big tests. So back in the day, and back when I was in college, and I know a lot of other folks still do this, in a lot of classes, you'll have a midterm and a final. And for me, I felt like, partially because of the way things broke down, but also I felt like that was just too much material to try to retain and regurgitate and all of that. So I felt that it was better for you, really, to break it into 3 sections. So this class, you'll have your test 1, test 2, test 3. Test 3 is like your final, if you want to think about it, but they're all basically the same. So this week you have test 1. So what happens with these tests is that there are 2 parts. The first part is basically like your quiz, but a lot longer. So there's 100 questions. They're drawing primarily from the quizzes. So a lot of these things, it's just reinforcing what you've learned. And that's the idea. You may not realize this, but when you're tested on things multiple ways, I mean, hopefully you realize this if you didn't before with the little section I had at the beginning on how to learn. But the idea is that we're trying to reinforce the things that you're learning. So when I bring questions back, it's that, again, I'm trying to get these things in so that they stick. Because that's the goal, really, of education, is to get information and concepts and ideas and thoughts to stick with you, and that impacts how you go through life. So you're going to have part 1, which is that, and it's going to look very familiar to you. You have 90 minutes, which is really more than enough time, but it'll be a lot of familiar territory, and so that'll be good. Then there's part 2, and I will give you a heads up ahead of time, which is that make sure that whatever you're taking it on, you have Spotify, you're signed up, and it's working, because you need Spotify to do this. There's going to be, it's pretty straightforward. There's 10 questions, and they're going to ask you about certain songs that come from the class, primarily from the listening guides. They won't ask, in the old days, I would ask, title and artist and things like that. Of course, the problem is if I'm linking to Spotify, it already tells you the title and the artist. So what I'll do is I'll ask you other questions about it. Sometimes students freak out ahead of time, and they're not like really weird, difficult. I'm not going to ask you what kind of effects the guitar was using or things like that. It's going to be pretty obvious if you've done the work and you've listened to it. So 1, make sure you are listening to the songs. That's the whole point of this class. It's all about the music, and now you're learning the how it was made, who made it, and the environment in which it was made, okay? But make sure that Spotify, you've got your account and it's signed in. Again, it's free, so I'm not asking you to do anything that costs you any money, even though I recommend that you get the paid one. 1, it doesn't have the annoying commercials. And 2 is that the artists get paid a little bit more. And I'm an old guy, right? I mean, I've been using Spotify for quite a while now, and I think I'm somewhat tech savvy, but and some of you are going to probably laugh at this, but I didn't know until recently the idea of how you could queue up songs. And I was out hanging out with my boys, and they're not boys, they're men, but and we were talking, because my one son would say to the other, "Hey, queue up this one next." And I always thought he just meant like he waits till the song ends and then he finds it or whatever. But you can actually, you may know this, right? You can search for a song, and then you can swipe it and put it up to the queue to play next. And you can actually do that for lots and lots of songs. So basically what you're doing is you're curating a playlist in real time. And so, I was thinking how fun that would be if you had a bunch of friends together, that you would just pass the phone around and that people would just queue up 20, 30, 40, 50 songs, and then it would be the fun of the night until you got the one jerk that had to put in the one song that was going to annoy everybody. But, that makes the party fun too, right? Okay, so those are the things with the tests. Those tests open up on Thursday, and you have until Sunday. So your normal week, you got this opening up Monday morning. You got your chapter, just one chapter this week on Soul and Motown. So you have the chapter opening up. Then you have your usual, this assignment is due by noon on Thursday. Your initial discussion post is due by the end of the day on Thursday. I am noticing there are some of you that are still not doing that initial post in on time. And I'm not sure if it's just because you're looking at the deadline and it's fallen off your radar. But remember that the initial post to get the full potential points has to be done by the end of the day on Thursday so that you have time to read other people's comments and comment on them. And then, everything else is due on Sunday, so you'll notice that this will come in. So I'll put a note in your Thursday reminder, just giving you a heads up like, hey, the test is now open too, so you can do those at whatever time you want. There is a catch though, which is that you have had to have taken all of the quizzes from all of the chapters that it's covering. So hopefully that doesn't leave anybody out. If it does, then you better talk to me ASAP. Okay, so that's that. Please make sure you're reading my comments. I've noticed an increase in that. It's great. I did do a little extra credit thing I think it was last week, and maybe only half the class got the points. And I know it wasn't a ton of points, but hey, free points are free points. And the thing is, you don't want to end the semester and be 7 points away from an A and end up getting a B in the class. And you may be thinking, wow, would Shane really do that? Yeah, I would. Because some of this stuff is so easy that if you don't do the work, I'll look back sometimes and people just blow off an assignment or don't do the quality of the work. And then that happens. One last thing too, concert report. Just keeping that on your radar. It's not due for a while, but you're welcome to get it done. Turn it in. Okay, so this week you have the chapters on soul and Motown. So again, quick, overview. We've learned about, country, folk, blues. We'll get more into folk in a few chapters. We've really seen strongly the African-American influence on our popular music. It just doesn't exist without it, really, with the exception of certain things. And so we saw it go through blues, urban blues, rhythm and blues that becomes rock and roll. And then we saw that split up and break down. Then we get into the 60s. And so last week we focused on teen idol pop. We talked about the Brill Building, talked about surf music, talked about the Beach Boys. So mostly pretty white stuff, right? Again, keep in mind, I used to have this really cool Excel sheet. It wasn't super pretty. And I'm still trying to figure out a way to make this work, but it was basically like a chronology by year. So you could look across and go, oh yeah, well, what came out in 1962? And then you would see all the artists related to the different chapters. I focused basically mostly on the listening guides, but then you really get a great visual that when I'm talking about, a certain, in this case, a soul artist or a Motown artist or whatever, it's happening at the same time that the Beatles are happening. It's happening at the same time the Beach Boys are happening. It's happening at the same time that Bob Dylan is happening. And so sometimes we get the sense, because we teach chronologically, it's the only way to do it, that we think chronologically. And also, when we study history, we tend to study, if you take your high school or your college history classes, your Western Civ classes or whatever, we tend to teach chronologically. And that's all fine and well, but in a class like this, where we're really focusing on genres and not just chronology, and there are textbooks that try to do it chronologically, and I've looked through them, and it's just really confusing. You have to jump around a lot. So you have to choose, right? Which is the kind of better way to do it. In my opinion, by genre works, but I want you to understand that these songs that we're talking about are happening at the same time as a lot of the other songs. So just be mindful of that. I'm a date guy. I'm always fascinated by dates. And so, that the Beatles' first single comes out in 62 and, all of these different things. So you start to figure out, how it works. So this week we're going to talk about soul, and we're going to talk about Motown, but we're going to talk about also, kind of what led into that. And so again, nothing exists in a vacuum, right? And so soul as a genre doesn't just show up on the scene. It is a coming out of rhythm and blues. It is very heavily influenced by, and this is weird that I'm looking off to the side while I'm talking to you, but I'm just trying to bring something up, because also it brought up another point that someone brought up, with the with the listening guides and things like that. But when we're talking about all this music, there's a heavy sacred influence. In other words, a lot of these soul musicians actually came out of the church, out of black churches. So when you have, people like James Brown, I think did it, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, certainly, a lot of them, they maybe as kids or later, Sam Cooke, they sang in church. With Sam Cooke, you actually have an artist who was in a sacred group, right, a gospel group, before he went solo and all of that. And Sam Cooke is one of the greats. So we're going to talk about soul and Motown, but there's this thread that comes through. So there's the rock and roll piece. The rhythm and blues becomes rock and roll. So there you're really thinking about Chuck Berry, and you're thinking about Little Richard and even Fats Domino. But then there's this other thing that comes up through there that's really more rooted in the real, like, sort of black experience, and that's where you get James Brown. James Brown's a really important figure. You're actually going to learn about James Brown twice in this class in two different chapters, because you're going to learn about him here as a rhythm and blues artist, and then you're going to learn about him again when we learn about funk. You're going to learn about Ray Charles, who is one of the great artists. They referred to him as one of the musical geniuses, and he was. He absolutely was. He had a challenging life. If you haven't seen the movie Ray, I recommend it. I think somewhere in the very last section, I have all sorts of like odd miscellaneous things. I have a reading list of books that I've read and liked, a lot of which are on the shelves behind me. There's a list of great movies connected to all of this. And so, a lot of these had really difficult, challenging, tragic lives. But Ray Charles is an interesting figure because he kind of had the freedom as an artist to change styles. So he did rhythm and blues, and then he did more soul. Then he had a period where he was having country influences. And so, you're going to learn about Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, James Brown. But I wanted to point something out, and again, I'm not giving you all the lectures. I had a student that, didn't mean to bug that. I don't want to knock this over. There was a little confusion about the listening guides, and I wanted to point something out. So you can see in the book, the listening guides. You should be very familiar with the listening guides by now. And so sometimes the listening guide for a song may appear on a following page. And not right where they're talking about it. So always make sure, I'm always asking, when I want examples, I'm asking for songs that are listening guides, not necessarily songs that are in the online materials, okay? But also I want to point this out in case you don't know this, but oftentimes you have like here, What I'd Say Part 2, Ray Charles, it gives you a breakdown by time and how this stuff works. And then at the end, lyrics, the singer is thinking about sex with allusions to dancing, the text, fourth quotes from Pine Top's Boogie Woogie. So a lot of times when I'm asking you what certain songs are about, it's right there. It's in the book. Okay. So trying to help you all out with that. So, but I want you to sometimes think. I want you to dig in deeper. I want you to do research if you need to do research. Look it up. As I said before, when I'm talking about current music, if I'm saying what's a current example of, and they're going to fit in here, I mean like right now within the last year or two at the most. So you're going to learn about soul music. Soul music was based in the South. Primarily in and around Memphis, and with the record labels of Stax and Volt Records, and then how they connected and were distributed by Atlantic Records. So you're going to learn about Wilson Pickett. You're going to learn about one of my absolute all-time favorite artists of any genre, which is Otis Redding. And so, I just love Otis Redding so much. To me, Otis Redding and Aretha Franklin epitomize soul. The way they sing, the inflections, what they sing about. And you'll notice with soul music that there's a lot of more freedom and flexibility in terms of the expression. It's very expressive music, very influenced by gospel singing. So you're going to learn about that, the role that Atlantic Records played in that. And Atlantic Records is a really important record label. Nasui and Ahmet Ertegun, who came from Turkey, started it, very much keyed into the black experience, just like you had Phil and Leonard Chess with Chess Records earlier. And so they signed a lot of black artists, Jerry Wexler that worked with them, and really launched a lot of them to fame. But not just them. Later, they would sign Velvet Underground. They would sign Led Zeppelin. So very important record label. So you're going to learn about the role of that. And then you're going to learn about Motown. Motown is also a black music. based in Detroit. And you'll learn about why Motown is called Motown, what it originally was, Hitsville, USA, and then why it became Motown and what that term means. You're going to learn about it. You're going to be asked about it. Started by a guy named Berry Gordy Jr., and he had a very specific vision for the type of music that he wanted released and the way that his artists were presented. And I'm going to leave it at that. I could do a full-on lecture, but then you're not going to get into the materials. You're going to be asked about the importance of Motown. Who were the artists on Motown? What were the influences? How did things work? And so make sure that you have the time. I've said this in the past. I've said this in comments. I'll say it again right now. Like, everything that you need is going to come from the book with supporting materials from the online materials. Okay. So everything you need to get an A is right there. It's important to understand what's happening at the world at this time. And I know that we're over 15 and whatever, but whatever. There's a lot going on. We're really in the 60s now. It may tip a tiny bit into the 70s, but we're going to kind of live in the 60s for a while, predominantly, for the next handful of chapters, okay? So in the 60s, you have to understand that there are really significant events that took place. So you have this police action that's taking place over in Vietnam that becomes the Vietnam War. And in the Vietnam War, what made it such a big deal in the 60s was that they were drafting young men to go serve, and a lot of them weren't coming back. And there was a high number of Black and Latino men, but a fair amount of white as well. And a lot of people didn't understand what was going on. And so there was a lot of controversy, which brought all the protests and brought all of that. So you have the Vietnam War that goes all the way through to mid 1970s. So that is a huge force in here. You have the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. You have the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy in 1968. You have the rise of the hippie movement. You have everything that's connected with the sex and drugs, and you have the women's rights, the gay rights. You have all these things that are taking place at this time. It is a very volatile time. And I'm setting this up so that you understand that in the United States, that absolutely informs everything in a profound way. And we're still dealing with either the impact of that or the lack of impact of that today. And when I ask you about that, I really want you to put the effort in. I mean, when we get into, some of you saw this with the Elvis one. I kept telling you how important Elvis was, and he was a game changer. And then I got some people that just put in barely any information on him. If I am stressing the importance of an artist or something that's happening to the extent that I am, such as the effect of the civil rights movement on music, then you better know that it's a big deal. And if you want an A on the assignment, you better make sure that you're hitting that. When I talk about the Beatles, when I talk about Bob Dylan, you can be sure that they're important, and there's a lot to do that. So Motown starts, and it's very, it's the sounds of young America. And if you look at a lot of the early Motown songs, Stop in the Name of Love, Mr. Postman, My Girl, they're all love songs. They're kind of coming out of that whole teen idol thing. But things start to shift in the later 60s because of what is happening as a result of the civil rights movement. And you can hear this in the songs. So when I ask you, how do songs change and artists change from early Motown to later Motown, to when you get to the later 60s, with songs like Cloud Nine, and you get into Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, which is without a doubt one of the great albums and great songs of all time. It's very much connected to that. Okay, so it's important that you understand that, and that you read, and that you put the work together. When I ask you, do you see any impact still happening today? I'll tell you right now that if you say no, I don't see any connections today, you're not paying attention to what's gone on in this country in the last 2 to 3 years, okay? There are very strong connections. And the thing is that the civil rights struggle has been going on for a long time, and it will continue to go on for a long time because of people and how they are, okay? So I think that I've set that up enough. I've given you the information now that you can go do the work. You know that if you have questions, you can reach out to me. but take the time to do good work. I'm going to tell you right now, I have high expectations in these coming up chapters. That's it. Have a great week. Don't forget about that test. See you soon. Bye.